Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. John back with the latest episode of The Evolved Caveman. And today I'm really excited to have as my guest, Michael Holt. And Michael is a holistic health practitioner. And he has blended degrees in traditional Western psychology, multiple certifications in exercise science, and his comprehensive study of meditation and martial arts to inform his unique mind-body pedagogy. He's unified his areas of expertise into a progressive wellness system and to increase vitality and deepen consciousness. Combining principles and training modalities from martial arts, meditation, Eastern philosophy, Western psychology, fitness training, archetypal embodiment, shamanic healing, and breathwork, his comprehensive system, offered to both individuals and groups, is designed to empower one to build a life that is aligned with one's deepest purpose. Wow, Michael, there's a lot of big words in there. Break that down for me a little bit more simply, like use small words so I can understand you.
Okay, small words. How do we boil that down? One of my favorite phrases is that the issues are in the tissues, and the healing journey often requires there's a place and time for talking and getting coherent around one's life history and really painting a clear picture of the way life was, but that can only go so far. Moving the body is also crucial. Furthermore, emotional stability and mental clarity are built upon the foundation of physiological stability. So what we eat matters. If we sleep matters. The quality of our hydration matters. The depth of our breath matters. Our movement diet matters. So we have to take care of the body and the mind. And any healing modality that only focuses on one or the other is missing half the picture.
Yeah, it's funny. It always makes me think of René Descartes, the French philosopher about 300 or 400 years ago, who said, "I think, therefore I am." Sure. And I remember when I was younger, I got really enamored with that statement, and it screwed me up for years because it separates mind from body. Right. And I think that's a huge mistake. But at the time, when I was in my 20s, I thought, a lot of my identity was tied up in thinking, getting good grades, being smart, achieving. And it took me a while to realize that that's not all there is to this whole thing. And in fact, it might be a detour in the wrong direction, and that it's far better to look at integrating mind and body to move forward in terms of or in service of success and happiness.
Totally. Yeah. A thing I often say in my work with my clientele and the groups that I train is that we're trained often in the West to live from the neck up. We forget that there's so much information available in the body, the intelligence, intuition, and we get so caught up with that voice that's the perpetual commentary that's happening on the moment 24/7 that we think that's what we are. But there are practices to quiet that voice and to allow for that intuition and intelligence to open, to live from the belly. And that's a skill that takes practice, but it's available. It's not encouraged in our educational system or, our society.
So tell me a little bit about your origin story. Like, how did you come to be here? What's your superhero origin story? I'm a geek at heart, so.
Okay, so I have a teacher who often describes people who are called to the path of deep meditation come from. If you distribute people along a bell curve, okay, at one end of the bell curve, you have people who are really struggling. They just can't get in the game. Life is very difficult. It seems like people are successful, but they just can't figure it out. Life is too hard. At the other end of the bell curve, you have the people who it looks like they've done it. They've achieved everything they set out to achieve. They have the job, they have the partner, they have the white picket fence, but they're still left with this emptiness. So through those two extremes of the continuum, those people who are really called to look for, okay, what is really going on here, to ask the deeper questions, to sit. And then the people in the middle, most people, life is not so good, it's not so bad. things are going okay. There's no real impetus to like dive into the deep end. So for me personally, I was struggling. I mean, I was struggling with depression, anxiety, fear. I was regulating afflictive emotions by isolating myself or using drugs and alcohol. And life just it was difficult. So it was difficult enough that I got to figure something out. Meditation seemed like a good idea. So that was about 10, 15 years ago. And I developed a practice and sought out some teachers. And over the course of time, I just watched my inner landscape shift. It's the process of making friends with myself, making friends with my mind. And through that practice, I saw that my external life started to reflect that internal change. And then I just really felt called to share this work with people because it's very rewarding.
And so now you do work with AlphaTribe, correct?
Yeah, we call it Tribe now. Just cut the Alpha off, so we're just straight Tribe. And so that's a men's community. We say that we focus on 3 primary spheres of development: freedom, purpose, and love. Freedom is the spiritual practice, the meditation piece, the practice of cultivating some sense of self-mastery. Excuse me.
Do you need to get that?
No, I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
Purpose is, obviously, why are you here? That inquiry of, okay, what am I supposed to do? What gives my life's meaning? What is my dream? What do I want to become? And then bringing that into the world through your chosen work, of making your profession purposeful, of turning your work into your monastery. And love is the deepening of love and intimacy with the partner. You can approach your relationship as a vehicle to deepen your consciousness and wake you up. My primary area of expertise is on the freedom side. So I use my meditation background and my martial art background, and my background as a holistic health practitioner to help men cultivate energy, to be healthy and happy and well, and be vital so that they can step forward into the life that they want to live.
So I love what you're saying. The question comes to mind, why men? Why not men and women?
Well, in my private practice, I do work with women, of course. Why men? I think that, with the changing landscape of gender responsibilities, and obviously in society we're in a shifting phase, which I guess is always the case. When has that never not been the case? But I think what's really missing is like ritual rites of passage, men coming together to be honest about their experience, men given the permission to give and receive very honest and often cutting feedback or criticisms that are meant to serve. And powerful things happen when men get together, just men. And powerful things happen when women get together, just women. And that's important. And that's ancestral. That's been happening forever. But it's a little bit lost in the modern era. So it's not, the work that I'm doing with men is not at all to the exclusion of women. It's so that we can develop ourselves and show up for the people in our lives with integrity, with depth, face our responsibility. So this is the way that we serve, by coming together.
Yeah, again, I really appreciate what you're saying. I think that, I've been working with men for, 20 years now. And one of the things that got me into it was Paul Kibble's work on the man box culture and just how we're socialized, and just that idea that even by the age of 5, we're already starting to shut down the use of emotional words. Mm-hmm. Generally because there's another 5-year-old in your group that's like, dude, don't say that. Like, don't be a girl.
Wow.
And just, the man box culture, like Paul Kibble was in Oakland at the time asking young men, what does it mean to be a man? And there's a lot of common themes in the answers: to be self-reliant, to be invincible, to be invulnerable, to be aggressive, to be dominant, to know everything about women, to not back down, to not give up, to not feel. Mm-hmm. And, that's kind of how we're raised. And if not by parents, then by coaches or peers or even girlfriends, because they're brought up in the same culture. But as soon as you step out of that box, you're slapped with an insult. And so if you're smart and sensitive, you jump back in really quick. So, because we don't want to hear that don't be a fag, don't be gay, don't be a pussy, don't be a bitch, don't be a little girl, all those things that we get growing up. And the net result of that is that I believe we shut down a large part of our emotional functioning. We shut down the curiosity about becoming more emotionally literate. And we're left with things like anger to some degree, or lust, or stress. Those are the three things that we can demonstrate without fear of being embarrassed, mocked, or humiliated.
Sure.
Which then cuts us off from emotion, cuts us off from communication and relationship. Then you fast forward 20 years later, you're in a relationship with your wife, if you're, straight. And, in the US, 75% of the divorces are initiated by women. And the major complaint I hear from women is, I can't connect with my husband.
Yeah.
And it's not our fault, but I do think it's our great responsibility to find ways to strengthen these skills where we've been disconnected from. And so I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you for saying that. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. It is our responsibility. And the degree to which you can connect with another person, connect with a woman in your life, and really feel her in your body is the degree to which you can offer yourself the same. And like you said, there is a tendency in culture for men to not feel or to repress. And that's not good for anybody. Mm-hmm. Even for the individual who uses emotional regulation strategy of suppression. That's our
primary strategy generally.
We live in a society where our primary means of emotional regulation is distraction. Mm-hmm. And that's scary, because what you don't face shows itself in unskillful ways. And that could look like blowing up at your son, or, getting in an argument, get somebody cut you off, or you could develop some kind of disease in your body because of all the emotional junk that's just been festering beneath the surface of your awareness. And that's why I always like to frame the practice of meditation, mindfulness practice, as really warrior's work. And that's what I feel my real calling is to call men to the practice by framing it in such a way that, okay, this is not hippy dippy trippy. This is not kumbaya, unicorns, rainbows, airy fairy. This is the most challenging practice that you could undertake, just to sit and feel. And it's not always pretty, the practice can be difficult sometimes as you allow those old wounds of whatever may have happened to bubble up into the surface of your awareness, to be felt, but to be released.
Yeah.
We can't skip that middle step of feeling if we want to be free. But through
I think it's key to happiness, right? I think that ultimately we all want to be happy. We go about it in different ways, but I think, most of the men that I've talked to, and myself at one point back in my past, we try to divorce ourselves from emotion, from feeling. We try to suppress it. Mm-hmm. And then we get good at that. And then we think, okay, well, I'm going to go be financially successful. And we think that's the way to happiness. Sure. And I can't tell you how many, 50-year-olds, give or take 10 years, that come to me and say, basically, I've done it all right. Like, I got good grades, I went to the right colleges, I got a good job, I make a lot of money, I've got a good wife, I've got kids, and they're miserable.
Yeah.
And they just find it wanting. There's no purpose to what they're doing, to your point earlier.
Sure. Yeah, I have, that's a good portion of my clientele. Very externally successful individuals that are left with a hole inside. And I think you make a good point. We do want to be happy, but I think at a deeper level, what we really want is to be at peace. And peace is a deeper pursuit than happiness, because peace means being okay with what's happening, even if it doesn't feel so good. Yeah,
and I hear your point completely, in the sense that I think that, to me, happiness is kind of the label put on it by, it's what most people understand.
Sure.
I say that I'll reframe it as contentment. Mm-hmm. Contentment is that the pleasant feeling that you get from understanding that you have everything you have everything you need right here, right now.
Yeah.
And so, if, the mind always wants to take us to the past and the future, which leads to sadness, regret, or anxiety, dread, worry, fear, stress. But the more you can bring yourself back here to your point of mindfulness and meditation, the more we can be and rest in that feeling of contentment. So yeah, I think peace is a pretty close relaxation, contentment.
Sure. Equanimity, the Buddhists might say.
Yeah.
Those are all mind states that take practice. You're not practicing that perspective. It's not just going to happen. What I've realized in my own life and the people that I'm working with is you don't have the option not to practice. Every moment is an opportunity to practice something. And so many of us, if we don't keep the eye on the mind, we don't realize that we're practicing things that complicate our life. We're practicing anxiety. We're practicing self-loathing. We're practicing judgment. And we can get really good at those things. We're practicing anger.
I know some experts.
Yeah.
But I mean, like my kids and my clients, I think, get tired of me saying, hey, well, I guess this is a great opportunity to practice. And they're in pain, their sadness, they're anxious, they're stressed, and they're like, they're pissed.
Right. So at some level, the beginning of the practice is just to make peace with the fact that you don't have any control over your mind, and it's running wild, generating anxiety. So
and so just sitting in anxiety, like, okay, so I guess this is what anxiety feels like. I'll be here for it. Exactly. So yeah, to the point of equanimity, I think that idea of understanding, one of the tenets of mindfulness is just allowing whatever's arising to arise without judgment. And that without judgment piece that takes a lot of practice. Yeah,
there's so many, when you talk about the tenets of mindfulness and meditation, there's so many sentences like that are so simple. Oh yeah, just allow it to arise. Yeah. And it is simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not an easy path, but it's so totally worth taking on.
So where do we go from here? So tell me a little bit about the martial arts piece of this, because that fascinates me as well. I went to a Dan Millman retreat in Costa Rica last year, and there was a guy that was really well trained in, I'm not sure if it was Tai Chi, but he was very good at managing his chi in a way that I had never seen before. And, part of it to me, and I'm not an expert in this area, but, my background, my main framework is scientific. So I think for many years I looked at some of this and like, it's a little bit woo-woo for me.
Sure.
And I saw this guy and I was like, holy shit, like that was the most concrete example of anything I've ever seen in terms of an energy in the body. And what he did is and he's a pretty big guy, but he had the biggest guy in the room, who was also a big guy, push against him while he was on one foot. He had the other foot wrapped around his leg, and he just held him there. And this guy pushed as hard as he could. And he said, I'm just taking my chi that's coming from him and just sending it down my leg and planting myself in the earth.
Sure.
And this guy couldn't topple him, couldn't send him off balance, which was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So to your point that it can be a little bit woo-woo, and for some people, if they just hear a word like chi, the eyes just gloss over it. But what if we just said energy?
Yeah. And emotions energy.
Yeah. This practice, I think you're describing, he was probably a Qigong practitioner, a Tai Chi practitioner. And those arts originate in China, Asia. And that's why they call it Qi, because it's a Chinese word. But we could just call it energy here.
Yeah.
So it kind of takes the mysticism out of it. And it is the practice of just, first of all, getting a feel for the life force that's in your body. It's there. And then start to feel it. And you can learn how to cultivate that energy, how to ground that energy, how to seal that energy. But it's just sensitizing your body to the energy that it is. It's like, there's the old kind of koan of the fish that doesn't know what water is because it's so available. It's hidden in plain sight. Yeah. It's the same with us with energy, with chi. But if we get really still, if we just stand and learn to feel over the course of time, we can have a very visceral somatic sensation of that chi. And then it becomes, then you have the capacity to really feel your body in space, to notice, how am I walking? How do I move through the earth? How can I hold my body in such a way that my presence can become a gift? You've seen it. Sometimes you see a guy, it's hard to articulate, but it's just like, wow, I trust that individual. And he doesn't have to say anything. He's just living inside of his body. That's embodiment. That's what we teach.
Yeah, and so this takes my mind, I guess it's all tangential at this point, but I'm going to be interviewing this guy, John Wineland, who's kind of a spiritual guru kind of a guy.
Yeah, John's a good friend of mine.
Oh, you know John? Okay, well, there you go. Small world. Mm-hmm. But and you might have the same thought on this. One of the things he said that I really liked was he was talking about kind of the essence of masculinity versus the essence of femininity. And the essence of masculinity is like, obviously there's more to it than this, but the essence of masculinity is basically to be still, to not move, to take up space. Whereas femininity, I think, is more movement. And I was thinking about that and I was like, yeah, I can see that in a lot of the men that are stereotypically masculine. I mean, think of like movie role models, that kind of thing. They're big, they're bulky, they don't move much. There's very little emotional expression on the face. You know, and pretty much in the movies, they're expressing anger, some degree of anger. I don't know, maybe something a little bit, maybe a smile at the beginning and end of the movie, maybe. But there's not much movement to them. And I was thinking about how much sense it makes for men in that state to work on something like martial arts or even dance, where we're learning to move our body in space.
Sure. Yeah, I think if we're going to define masculinity and femininity, we first need to divorce the concept of gender from the energies of masculinity and femininity. And I think you're right. We could look at masculinity as just empty presence. Through the lens of Qigong or Tai Chi, they would call that yang.
How do you spell that?
Yang?
Yeah.
Y-A-N-G, like the yin yang.
Oh, yin yang. Mm-hmm. Yin yang. Gotcha.
And so for femininity would be just nature, expression, movement. But you can't have one without the other. If you look at like reality, the two forces that are constantly creating reality, that are penetrating each other, is emptiness and form, consciousness and movement. They need each other. Now, some human beings may gravitate toward one side or the other, and typically men gravitate toward the emptiness side, and typically women gravitate toward the form side. And like what you said about the call of the masculine to just be still, that does not imply any kind of unfeelingness or insensitivity. It's becoming radically sensitive to everything that is happening, but not needing it to be any different, not needing it to shake it off or move your body, but just sit still and feel. And as a man cultivates that capacity, he's cultivating what's polarity. So there's an attraction there. The more still, the more present he can become without needing to fidget every time or scratch every itch or, become spastic. There's a magnetic attraction of feminine beings toward that sexual attraction. But that's not just happening in men and women. That's reality.
Right. What do you think about shooting for a balance between the masculine and feminine within the individual?
Yeah, balance is crucial. Absolutely.
To me, it's all about moderation. It's all about, I think Aristotle was right in this idea that happiness is about moderation. And I think any trait that I think of on a 1 to 10 scale, if you get too far to the 1 or too far to the 10, you tend to get in trouble.
Totally. Balance is crucial in all things.
And so one of the other things that interests me is this idea of embodiment in men. So you work with men a lot in terms of getting into their body. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So like I said at the outset of the conversation, many of us live from the neck up. So we have no idea how the shape of our body is influencing our mind and the minds of the people around us. It's not occurred to us that if we just pull our shoulders back, we become more trustable. If we just bend our knees a little bit and sink our weight, we become more grounded. All these states, these mind states that we're looking for can be accessed in the body. And we don't live, I mean, it's not always appropriate to tell a guy, hey, I don't trust you because you have this twitch in your face and you keep scratching your ear and your right shoulders roll forward. You're not going to say that to somebody. But in the workshops, those things are welcome. So we say, oh, wow, everyone was always thinking this, maybe at a level that they weren't even consciously aware of. But if I just learn how to hold my body, my presence becomes more powerful. I can literally be a gift in a room through the depth of my breath and the shape that I hold my body. I can put people at ease. That sounds a little woo-woo, but that's 100% true.
No, that doesn't sound woo-woo to me at all. I mean, one of the things that I'll pull out with my clients is I've got this emotion map that has, 16 different emotions. And it was a study that they did between the East and the West. And they asked about 1,000 people, where in your body do you experience anger, sadness, embarrassment, envy, happiness, love? And they would color in on the computer where they experience it. And, it goes from orange and yellow, which is sort of energy and activation and heat, to blue, which is sort of a lack of energy and coldness. And so, like if you're depressed, your limbs are all blue because there's no energy. You just want to sit there and, stay at home because you've lost someone you love. But it's funny, one of the things that fascinates me about this is anger and happiness are very, very similar on the surface. And these are just two-dimensional images from the front. And, there's activation and energy in the head, the chest, and the arms down to the hands, down to about the abdomen. And one of the things I'll tell clients is I think the difference here is if you turn the body and look at it from a side view, to your point, anger, when you're angry, your shoulders are being pulled forward, right? You're like, if you think of a boxer, you're protecting yourself, versus happiness. If you think of pride, there's an expansiveness in the chest, the shoulders get pulled back, chin goes up slightly, and it's a whole different embodied experience.
Sure. So we can learn how to find those emotional experiences through the shape of our body if we learn how to pay attention to what's happening in our body. And if we don't, we may find ourselves being puppeted by emotions that we're not really conscious that we're feeling, but they are dictating our course of action in the world.
Yeah.
Going for that 8th beer or that 2nd pint of Haagen-Dazs or whatever, a lot of the things that we do to regulate emotions that we're not able to feel. So again, that's why this practice of becoming sensitive to what's happening is warrior's work. And sensitivity implies crying or a weakness or something, but we can look at sensitivity as just the capacity to feel what's happening. And emotions are physical sensations in the body. It's the body preparing itself to take action. So the practice is just to become sensitive to what you're feeling.
Yeah, and I like the idea of emotions at their core are basically our system for approach or avoidance. Mm-hmm. It's either come towards something or back away from something. Mm-hmm. And, some like guilt have both built into it, but that's a whole other story. But I think the more we can look at them as feedback, and sometimes as a feedback system gone awry, like when you get really anxious over something that's not life-threatening, it's helpful. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I talked to a lot of people in the past about addiction, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. And every one of them, I'll say, look, realize that every time you have a trigger, every time you have a thought of, I want to use, there's an emotion attached to that thought.
Sure.
It could be, I'm bored, I want to drink. It could be, I'm going out for Friday night, I'm excited, I need to take a Valium or Xanax, or I need a bong hit. I mean, anger, sadness, all these things we don't want to feel what we're feeling, or we want to turn down the volume on it, and we just get in this mindless habit of using to do so.
Yeah. So I have a teacher who would say that there's 4 ways that we experience an emotion: reaction to the conditions of the present moment. Something happens in the present moment that elicits an emotional response. Number 2 is self-generated emotion. Have you ever noticed that you can think your way into anxiety or fear or sadness or a positive state, but it doesn't have any basis in what's happening right now? The third way is we can connect with another human being because we are empathetic beings. We're meant to be in contact with each other. And I can feel in your body, in my body. I can get a feeling for where you're at. We can all do that. And then the fourth way is the release of old traumas that we didn't have, that exceeded our bandwidth to metabolize when it happened. So the body stores it for later processing. So we have to cultivate the sensitivity, not only what we're feeling, but where is it coming from? Why am I so worried about this meeting that I'm having on Wednesday right now? Why am I generating anxiety? It's not happening right now. Furthermore, sometimes something old comes up, and if we can't feel it, this all happens in a snap.
Oh, yeah.
Your mind will say, I wasn't ready to feel that then, not ready to feel it now. How can I free myself from this? Oh, I'll generate an afflictive emotion that I am comfortable feeling. So we can spend our whole lives running from the things that are right here inside of us, just wanting to be let go of and healed.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was interviewing Dr. Faith Harper, who's a trauma psychologist down in Texas. And she's got a really low bar for, quote, trauma, which I don't know if that's a great word for men, because that in and of itself can be triggering.
Sure.
But let's go with that just for ease of languaging. She defines trauma as anything that disconnects you from a feeling of safety.
Yeah.
Now, that is a really low bar, which I love and fear at the same time, in the sense that I love it because it allows me to go back, and my clients to go back and look at our past and say, what might have been traumatic for us on the way up?
Sure.
And is that affecting me now? Yes. And to what extent? And then the other part of it is that I think that people can use that to fall into a victim mentality or to reinforce a victim mentality. So I have these mixed feelings about it.
I hear you. And I do like that definition. I've heard it described as big T trauma and small T trauma. And small T trauma is a very low bar. I think some people, if they hear the word trauma, it implies like some very traumatic, like being kidnapped or something. Right. And that happens to some people, unfortunately, but it doesn't. We have all accumulated traumas in our body. Something happens. It could just be like your dad had a rough day at work and he just yells at you when you're 3. It just shocks you, and now it's in your body. Just a little thing, but it exceeded the bandwidth of your capacity to metabolize in that moment. So it's in your body now for later. And now it's later. So we have to cultivate the sensitivity as, okay, is what I'm feeling right now doesn't have anything to do with what's happening now, or is it a release? And that's why the practice of equanimity is so important, because you allow your body just to let things go without needing to explain what it comes from.
So can you give me an example of where you've noticed that in your life?
Yeah, I mean, the course of my life, I've been left with what my teacher would call pools, Eckhart Tolle would call pain body. So There's fear, there's anxiety, there's sadness in my body. And the more still I become through my meditation practice, the more those pools are invited to just liberate themselves. So I may be in a period of sitting and just get hit with a wave of sadness. It doesn't have anything to do with what's happening right now. It's a release. It's a letting go. Now, the upside is, and what I know to be true because I've experienced it, is it takes an enormous amount of energy to hold those pools together beneath the surface level of your awareness. So as you start to liberate them, you have more energy. I have more energy now than I did when I was 10 years ago. I look at some of my teachers in their 70s and they just wide-eyed, bop around, write a book, teach a class. It's because they're just empty. They're not clinging on to anything.
Yeah, I like that metaphor of, trying to keep a beach ball underwater.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of energy, really difficult to do, and eventually it's going to pop up and make itself known.
Sure.
Have you noticed any past trauma coming up in current relationships?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean,
anything that comes to mind that you're willing to share?
I think that's what a relationship is. It's like, hey,
chance to heal yourself.
I'm attracted to you because of my past trauma. You're attracted to me because of your past trauma. I'm going to hurt you in all the ways that you were hurt that feel like love to you. You're going to do the same to me. Yeah, totally. So I've totally experienced that in the type of women that I'm attracted to, and the type of women that are attracted to me. So we come in we look for love the way that we were loved, and that's a good operating system if you were loved, if you were loved well. But if you weren't loved well, then you're running that operating system with who you select as a partner. Mm-hmm. So at some point, you may have to look at your operating system and make some shifts.
Yeah, I mean, I just noticed this most recently. I've been dating a woman who's a therapist for almost 4 years now, and she went to Europe for a month, and there was a lot wrapped up in this trip, but I realized I'm really having a hard time with her being gone without me. And, you know, I felt hurt. I was getting irritated. And I had to go back and look at what are the similarities between now and back when I was a child. And I found out that there were some that my parents used to go on, you know, pretty long trips when I was pretty young. And they would leave us with a babysitter. And I was just like, so that's coming up now from way back when I was 6, 5, 7.
There's always such a heavy influence of our early life. It's the conditions that formed our body mind. So there's no escaping, you know, they're still in. So that's why the sensitivity is required to develop, to cultivate that metacognitive capacity to have a look at your mind from the bird's eye. What is really happening right now? Mm-hmm. And that's the first step to being skillful in the world, you know, to exercising some level of control over your mind and where it goes, so that we're not just bopping around with our blinders on complete automatic process.
Yeah, I really appreciate that idea of I or you, I'm not my thoughts, that I'm the being that kind of can look down on my thoughts and go, oh, there's that thought again, if I'm an idiot.
Sure.
I've seen that before. I know it's not true. I'm going to let it go.
Yeah. So to get back to what we talked about, the masculine and feminine, the masculine orientation to life, I believe, is to identify with the emptiness, the consciousness, the context in which self is emerging, in which thoughts is emerging, in which emotions are emerging from and returning into. You know, that emptiness that starts to feel more like home than whatever's constantly coming through it. And that's how we experience peace.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the more we can get out of our head, the more peaceful we are too. Although, you know, I don't think you're ever going to stop the thoughts from coming. I think you change how we relate to the thoughts.
Exactly. And I think that's a lot of beginning meditators. I think they struggle with their practice because they say, I can't stop thinking.
Yeah. I'm not supposed to be void.
In my classes, there's no instruction to stop thinking.
Yeah.
It's not even possible. Mm-hmm. The lungs breathe air, the heart pumps blood, the brain thinks thoughts. You just develop a less personal relationship with what's happening, and you just become interested, you know, like a detective, like, ooh, what's that about? Where's that coming from? Let it come, let it go.
Yeah.
And in time, just like a nagging child that you just stop catering to in every moment, the child just kind of quiets down. It's the same with the mind. It's a training of the mind. The less we pay attention, maybe that's not the right phrase, the less we identify with that perpetual yammering that's happening behind our eyes, the more it just tends to quiet down.
So along those lines, so what do you feel we're shooting for or looking to become in terms of men? What does positive masculinity mean to you? What's the end goal? What are we developing towards?
Responsibility, firstly, for your state of your mind, for the health of your body. You know, let's start right here. Let's start with this body mind. How can I train this to be more healthy, to be more peaceful, to be more happy? And then I can influence my space because I'm taking good care of myself. The primary thing is responsibility. And that's not to imply pointing the finger at why you came not to be the way you came to be and whose fault is this. Just let that all go. Just have a good, hard look in the mirror and say, okay, I'm responsible for this. I've been gifted a life. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how long I am. How can I make this better? How can I be better? And then once you're really taking care of yourself, then you can step out and be of service to other people. And that could mean just being available, just to be available to connect with your the clerk at the grocery store, to be here, to be present, to really let it land in your bone marrow, that you don't know where you come from, and you don't know where you're going, and you don't know how long you have. And when we start to grapple with those questions, we're available for this present moment. We're available to be useful. We're available to be of service.
Yeah, it's a really good point. To the extent that we're living in the past or the future, we're not here to help out or be there for others.
Right. And the first person that we need to help out and be there for is the man in the mirror. And a big part of that involves, turning toward the stuff that you've successfully avoided for your whole entire life.
So on that note, did you struggle with that idea? Like, I was raised to be of service to others, to help others, to deal with everyone else's needs before my own. So it took me some time to figure out, wait a second, that's backwards.
Yeah, that's totally backwards. And that's not a sustainable way to go through life. You have to fill yourself up first. You have to really make friends with the man in the mirror. You have to learn to love the man in the mirror. And then you fill yourself up with that, and you have enough to share. But if we're giving away to people in our life out of some feeling of, wanting to be a martyr, wanting to be of service, but we're not taking care of ourselves, we're running ourselves into a deficit, and ultimately we're just going to be a detriment to the collective. So what if everybody took it upon themselves to take impeccable care of themselves first? To parent themselves, to care for themselves the way you care for a child that you love. A byproduct of that is we relate to each other differently. So the primary responsibility is yourself, and that's not selfish. That's service. Because I will say this real quick, because once that really becomes your orientation toward life, service is just a natural byproduct. Mm-hmm. It just happens because it feels good.
And it's funny, speaking of the stories that we spin in our own minds, I think a lot of people are kept back from that self-care first due to a fear of being selfish.
Sure.
And, I remember dealing with that myself many years ago, that, I can't do that. Like, I can't take care of myself first. That would be selfish.
Right.
So it's, I think it's a really important approach to life to learn. Sure. And to internalize.
Yeah, and I think also we have to have a look at what does it mean to take care of yourself. I'm not taking care of yourself doesn't mean taking a luxury vacation. It might, but what I'm talking about is making friends with your mind, of caring for your body, of learning how to cultivate positive states of mind, states of being. Really, that's what the practice is for me. It's making friends with yourself.
So do you get into the work of Kristen Neff, like the self-compassion work, when you talk about making friends with yourself? Is that part of it?
I'm not familiar with Kristen Neff. Self-compassion is a practice. So I've studied, I wouldn't call myself a Buddhist, but I do study Buddhism. I like to think of Buddhism as a map. To get to the place of self-liberation. And one of the routes on that map is the cultivation of what they call the Brahma Viharas, which are the four boundless states: metta, karuna, upekkha, and mudita. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And each one of those has their own practice, and you can offer that practice to yourself and to the people in your life. And the more you train your mind to do that, the more it just spontaneously does it. Mm-hmm. It's like I said earlier, there's no option not to practice. We are always practicing something. The path of mindfulness and meditation is the recognition that every moment is an opportunity to practice something. And here I am in a position I can practice something that makes me feel good and makes the people in my life feel good. That's the life of the Bodhisattva. Mm-hmm. I live for the liberation of all beings. And that's a high bar, but why not go for it?
Yeah, I mean, the self-compassion piece is huge to me. I think that it's been difficult for a lot of men that I've talked to because they get attached to the inner critic, yelling at yourself in your own mind. And then I come along and I'm like, well, how about if you were to speak to yourself as if you were 5? Or how about if you were to speak to yourself as if you were your best friend? Sure. Or how about if you were to speak to yourself as if you're 2? Right. And I think, that often combined with meta practices where you get to that point of thinking, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live life with ease and well-being. Yeah. A lot of men like, oh, I can't do that. Like it feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel normal. It's like, well, yes, but neither did riding a bike at first. Like it's a new skill, so expect some discomfort. Right. And it's also critically important to begin.
Yeah, and if you went all the way back, I promise there was a time in every man's life where being self-critical felt a little weird and a little off. It might be when you were very, very young, but with practice, it just became an operating system that you got very good at. So if you're going to shift your theme of emotional regulation from self-judgment to loving kindness, it's going to be a little weird at first. It's going to feel fake. It's going to feel forced, but with time, continued effort and practice, it just becomes the new way that the mind operates. The mind is very plastic. Yeah. It will respond and adapt to changes. So you can be a totally different person internally after a few years of practice. And for me, that's such a motivator because I've seen shifts in my own life. I've seen shifts in the people, who I'm close with in life that have a deep practice. And I imagine that. I wonder what I'll be like when I'm 80, if I just keep going with this. So it creates this, wow, just keep going. Who knows what you could become?
Yeah, little steps in the right direction.
That's all it is.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that I try to remind those men that get stuck in those places is, well, take yourself back to when you were 9 months old, 1 month or 1 year old. You were learning to walk. Do you remember ever falling down and then giving up?
Yeah.
Would you ever say, screw it, I can't do it. Like, I just don't have it. Right. No, you didn't. You just kept going. There was no inner critic, to your point, at that age. Right. You were determined. You're like, I'm going to get this no matter what it takes. And you keep trying. You never give up. And so if we apply that same perseverance and effort to some of the areas that we're talking about here, I think the results can be massive because it's not that you have to do all this overnight. It's that, if you think of a huge oil tanker on the ocean, if that oil tanker changes its course 2-3 degrees, initially it's not going to make much of a big deal, but over time you come to a completely different destination.
Absolutely. Great analogy. And I love that. And it's true what you said, just small shifts made over time. And, when I work with my clientele one-on-one, years ago, as I started deepening my education of what it means to be happy and healthy, I just wanted to give these people, here's all these tools, just do all of this. And I realized it's overwhelming. So I've developed a curriculum where it's very slow and steady shifts in the right direction. And as you make these shifts, you start to cultivate more energy. So you have more energy to make the next shifts and the next shifts. As self-compassion and self-love emerges, there's this natural impetus to want to take care of yourself. So it's not a discipline thing. I've noticed this in my life. I was very disciplined young man in the sense of like militaristic, rigid discipline. You don't want to do it? I don't give a fuck. Go to the gym. Get it done. And now there's this shift as compassion and self-love emerges from discipline to harmony, which I think is a higher expression of discipline, where the things that are good for you actually are appealing. Mm-hmm. You're wanting to take care of yourself.
So you mean you don't fight going to the gym?
No. And if there's some days where I just don't have the gas, I don't go.
Right.
And so what does my body need? What do I need today? I need rest. So rest is a part of my program. One of my teachers makes a distinction between working out and working in. If we're only working out, giving energy, but we don't have practices to cultivate energy, then we run ourselves into a deficit and we get sick. Right. So working in is important. And the more I've made that distinction and made working in a priority, the more energy I have to go work out. I fucking love going to the gym. But there was a time in my life where I had to drag my sorry ass there. And I thought I was doing myself a favor. In retrospect, I wasn't. I was running myself into the ground. So I worked as a fitness professional for a long time, and I see people get to the point in their life where they want to make a change, and they say, okay, I'm ready to get healthy. I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week and kick my ass. But their lifestyle, they're not cultivating enough energy to do that. And maybe they link with a trainer who's in great shape and they say, okay, here's what I do. You do this. But they don't have the energy to get through it. So they can stick to it for a couple months and then just get it. So if you look at, I've developed the 6 rules that I use with my clientele. The rules of being a human. Number 1 is what we've been talking about, the state of your mind. What goes on? What are you thinking about all the time? That's affecting you. Let's wrangle your mind so that it becomes your ally. Number 2 is the depth of your breath. Let's start there. Let's have a look at your breathing. Are you breathing functionally? Inhales, bringing energy in. Are you pulling energy in through your breath? Look at the breath as a continuum. On the one end, you have a deep, like you just woke up on vacation. They just take that big breath and it comes with this kind of calm. And at the other end, you can have it like an anxiety attack. Where does your habitual breath fall on that continuum? If your breath is shallow, that's a constant kind of subtle transmission to your body mind that things are not okay, things are not okay, things are not okay. So let's take a deep breath. Then the quality of your sleep, then the quality of your food and your hydration. Then if you get all those, if you manage those variables, now you're going to start to feel alive and have energy. Now going to the gym is something that you have to do. It's not something that you're dragging yourself in there, running yourself further and further into a deficit. So it's about being healthy. And it's about being happy. And when we follow those rules, a lot of problems go away.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those rules with me. They make a tremendous amount of sense to me. I'm aware of the time, and I got to wrap up because I got to get to the gym.
Cool.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I shouldn't have? And do you want to do a shout out for the tribe? How would you like to?
I'd love to do a shout out for the tribe. And another thing that we didn't really get to hit on, but maybe we can have another conversation down the road, is more of the martial art. You know, how martial art really affected my path and my development, and how I'm bringing that into the tribe as a way to access and liberate afflictive emotions. Because I don't think that there's any more efficient and safe technology for the liberation of very natural emotions that are in the human male's DNA than the container of martial art. So for me personally, that the more I'll say this, the greater my capacity and violence has become, the more peaceful I've become, which is the paradox of the martial path. It's something that I really want to share with everyone. And of course, I'll shout out the tribe. If anyone's interested, you could visit the website. It's wearesacred.org. And then there's a link for the tribe, and there's opportunities to engage. We're hosting seminars, workshops. We have monthly calls. And I hope to see some guys signing up.
And you're situated in Southern California?
Yeah, I'm in Venice Beach.
Awesome. I love Venice Beach.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, we'll have to get together for a cup of coffee when I'm down there.
Sounds good, man. You drop me a line.
That'd be awesome. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoyed everything that you shared. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, John. You be well.
All right. You too.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.